Okay, we are looking at code generation, and we said that there are three important parts to code generation. First one is instruction selection, which we looked at, where we need to look at what is the level at which the intermediate representation is, and depending upon that, whether we are able to generate efficient code or not. The second was nature of the ISA, whether it is complete, whether it is uniform across all different kinds of types. I mean, typically there aren't any types apart from integer and float or at max bytes. But that uniformity affects the code generation because there might be different kinds of registers used for different purposes. For example, in case of 8086, in the earlier days, we used to have a math coprocessor, which means that all these mathematical operations, the floating point operations, these were offloaded to a different coprocessor. 8086 processor per se was able to generate execute only the instructions corresponding to logical instructions and integer arithmetic, etc. So now these are kind of merged, but there are still the ALU that we talk about, arithmetic logic unit. Typically it has two components. One is for the integers, another is for floating point, because the operations are very different. So in the hardware you need to have separate gates and separate transistors corresponding to each of these. And finally, how you want to have the quality of the generated code, that also affects the quality of the the context really affects the quality of the generated code. And depending upon the level at which your IR is, you might have different quality of the generated code, as we saw an example of increment or decrement, etc. The second aspect of code generation, the second concern of related to code generation is how do you do the register allocation. So there are two parts. Typically we say register allocation, but there are essentially two parts which have very small difference, but nonetheless. So allocation means that I need to select the variables to be put into the registers. I have large number of variables, a large amount of memory, and then I have a few registers. So I need to choose which variables to put into the register. That is called as register allocation. Then there is register assignment, which is a kind of complementary problem, which is saying that now I have chosen these variables to be put into registers. Now I have to choose which variable will go into which register. The reason why this is important is because if I choose a particular register, I might get better efficiency. If I choose a different register, I might lose some efficiency. It's not only because it's special purpose and therefore I should not be choosing it. That comes under instruction selection. But some registers are going to be beneficial from the efficiency perspective, as we will see. Typically, when we say register allocation, it involves both these aspects: filtering out which variables to put into and which register a variable should go into. And in general, it's a hard problem, and therefore we need to worry about approximations. Also, I should mention, while we had some discussion about approximations and heuristics and conservative estimates last time, I will also mention that from a theoretical perspective, sometimes it is okay to have a 2x algorithm, right? Which means that it is too approximate, let's say, and that might be considered as a very good approximation ratio because there may not be any other approximation better than that known. However, in practice, 2x might turn out to be very large. For example, if I say that if I give you a code and that optimally requires, let's say, 10 registers, and I have an algorithm which gives me at max 20 registers, that may not be very useful because there is large difference between 10 and 20. Think about it that from here you want to go to, let's say, from here meaning from the campus, you want to go to, let's say, Express Avenue Mall, you put it into the Ola, and it says that it's using an approximate algorithm to compute the distance from campus to Express Avenue, and maybe it is how much, maybe 8 kilometers or so. And it says that it is going to be maximum up to 16 kilometers, right? So that seems a little odd. At least in practice, for such applications, it might not be very useful. In some other context, it might be. Right? So whatever is happening theoretically, that may not be useful in practice or practically useful. So we have to be aware of this also when we are dealing with compilers. And then there are architectural conventions which complicate matters with respect to register allocation. For example, as we also discussed in the previous slide, instruction selection. The some registers might be available for some special purposes, so we should not be using those. Right? So like this, there are special registers. For example, in the earlier versions of x86 architectures, we used to have some base register and then some index register. And a specific base register has to be used with a specific index register. Those were also the complications. Similarly, if I don't know if you are aware of, but typically you will see, if you look at the assembly code, you will see %EAX, right, as the register name. That EAX is the extended AX register accumulator, but that EAX is 32 bits. It used to be 16 bits earlier in the whatever 386 days, 80386 days. So that used to be AX, and AX itself was 16 bits, but that was not alone. AX was actually divisible as AH and AL, which is A higher and A lower. So the higher bits of higher 8 bits of AX used to be, you can refer to it directly as AH and AL. Now this is really complicated, because now if I have pushed something in AL, I cannot push something in AX, because I can use AX and AL both together, the 16-bit as well as 8-bit together. And that really complicates matter, and CISC typically has this issue of complicating the both the ISA as well as the code generation aspect. So like I was, so some of these are mentioned here. Another aspect which comes is that in case of accumulator, there are implicit assumptions that I'm going to just say that some instruction exists, some instruction has is referring to, let's say, some BX register and then SI register and so on, and then its effect is actually visible inside the accumulator. So if you just parse the instruction, you won't see any occurrence of AX or EAX, but the semantics of that instruction is such that EAX gets used, and therefore EAX is not available for register allocation. This is something which I need to deduce from the instruction itself. So this kind of adds to the complexity, and therefore code generation needs to be aware of all of these issues with respect to a particular ISA or a particular architecture. Any questions on this part? So we looked at this probably in the context of IR generation when we were discussing about the register allocation, that can we use graph coloring for register allocation. So just think about it, we will come back to this a little later. But if there are any questions or any even thoughts on how you can use graph coloring for register allocation, what should be the nodes, what should be the edges, that you can just push to the chat box. All right, we'll move to the third important aspect when it comes to code generation, and that is instruction ordering. So we have chosen the instructions to be used. We have identified the registers to be used for certain variables which are used inside these instructions. Now I need to also choose how the order of these instructions should be. Okay. Again, the instruction order affects execution efficiency. That is my statement, but you have to prove it. And in general, picking the best order is hard. And we need to look at multiple instructions at a time sometimes. to get the best efficiency. So can somebody give me an example of example IR uh, where the meaning remains the same, but if you reorder the statements, then you get different efficiency, right? And you should be able to mention why it is efficient. So can people think about this part and push the answer to the chat window? How register assignment can improve efficiency? Yeah, so Nishit question is that how register assignment can improve efficiency. We are going to study that. It will require me some build up, but I will mention to you still briefly. So let's say that there is some register which I push a particular variable, but that variable is not getting used anytime soon. It's going to be used later. And when the next variable comes in, which has a recent use, that does not have register free. Right? So because I have pushed this particular variable A into the register, so for B there is no register available. Therefore, I need to push this A to the let's say spill it to the memory. Then I move B to the register, use it, and then when A's use comes, at that time I can load from memory and push it into the register, the variable A. In contrast, if I had done something else, that I would have probably pushed some other variable, let's say C variable is pushed into this register, but C does not have a future use. Then I don't need to spill it to the memory. I can replace it with B, use it, and then when A comes, I need to anyway load it from it. Right? So I'm just giving one simple example, but you'll be able to see that if you push things arbitrarily without noticing what is the use of that variable later, then that register might get underutilized. So that improves efficiency. All right. Column measure access of a 2D array. Interesting. So what Shirisha is suggesting is that if you are doing a column measure access of a 2D array and you start pushing the elements to the register, you might get a different, you will have the same meaning but different efficiency. Are you using array or you are just talking about something else? Shirisha. Are you talking about registers or you are talking about something else? Right. So, yeah, that is correct. I probably did not mention it here, but anyway, that's fine. So, if you have the column measure order, because your cache is going to follow the spatial locality. If you start accessing the variables, then that row is going to get populated into, let's say, the cache. And but if your access is column measure, you would actually want that the column should be brought into the cache, right? So that can affect your efficiency. If you just reorder the instructions that I'm accessing A of 00, then A of 01, A of 02, instead of that I start accessing A of 00, A of 10, A of 20, and so on. Let's say I unroll the loop and then start accessing these elements and then I reorder. It's possible that you will get better efficiency because things will be in the cache as you are accessing this. That makes sense, sure. Any other suggestions? we can reorder such that the live period of variables reduces without changing. That makes sense. So in fact, since you have brought up this term, live range it is called. In fact, the previous question that you asked about this, how register assignment can improve efficiency, it actually gets done using the live range analysis. So in fact, the example that I gave was that A was assigned, but it is not used for a long time, so it is live for a long time. And we should try to reduce that live range as much as possible so that it conflicts with other live ranges as little as possible. Good. So we can reorder such that the live range of variables reduces. That is correct. Any other suggestions? All right. So let's move ahead. I think there is also something which we discussed some time back when we were targeting code generation of a particular instruction, A equal to B plus C and then D equal to A plus E and so on, where there was, let's say, store into A in the first statement because of the first statement and then loading from A because of the second statement. Well, that is not really instruction ordering. Yeah, that is not instruction ordering. But I will give you some other example. So let's say that we have a similar example that we were discussing. That there are three variables A, B, C, and then I am going to do something with respect to those variables. In this case, I am calculating A plus B, and then followed by A plus B plus C, right? And that I am going to store inside D, right? So D equal to A plus B plus C is the original statement, which I have lowered into an assembly code. So this is an assembly code because I am using registers. This is not an IR, and so that is loading all the variables that I require into the registers one by one and then using those. In contrast, if I say that I am going to move the use of a variable closer to its definition or use of a register closer to its definition, then I will be able to do R0 plus R1 prior to assignment to R2 equal to C, right? So I can reorder instruction number 4 and instruction number 3 without changing the meaning. How do you figure out that there is no meaning change? If I reorder instruction 3 and instruction 4, how can you say, or how can the compiler automatically say that there is no change of meaning? That is, the semantics remain preserved. No dependency. Good. Yeah, so this is called as dependence analysis, where you perform which variable is getting assigned to or which register is getting assigned to, that is a definition, and then which variable is getting used, right? That is a use, and that definition is matched with the use, and you get some sort of a DAG, because the same instruction might have multiple uses. You get a dependence DAG. This dependence DAG gives you a way in which you can reorder the instructions. In the sense that whatever is something on the left and whatever is something on the right, but there is no dependence between these two, you can execute them in any order, right? As long as you are preserving the dependencies, you are good. Right? So essentially a topological sort is going to give you one order, but then topological sort need not be unique, and all those different orders are going to give you different ways in which you can evaluate the same expression without changing the meaning. So these dependencies are important from the perspective of the compiler, the definition and the use. As long as you meet those, you are good. And that's also one of the reasons why converting it into a static single assignment form is often going to make the life of a compiler easy, because then you are guaranteed that these are different variables, right? Or these are different variable instances, and therefore we don't need to worry about some definitions and some uses. This happens in the sequential setting, so which we are talking in the context of sequential code. In case of parallel code, there are other complications which arise. Alright, so we can reorder 3 and 4, and the effect of that is that the semantics remain the same, but now R0 plus R1 I can push into, let's say I have used R3. R2 I have not used so far because that instruction 4 is getting executed first, right? Or I can replace it with R2 equal to R0 plus R1. And now after this, R0 and R1 are unused. If R0 and R1 are unused, I don't need a fourth register to store the value of C. I can reuse one of these registers R0 or R1. And that gives me a different register allocation, and which uses one fewer registers than the total number of registers that are used inside the first code. So just by reordering the instructions, I am able to reduce the number of registers, right? This is not magic, it's just that you are following certain rule which is talking about the dependencies across variables or across registers, definitions and uses, and I am trying to push the use as close to the to its definition as possible, and that is going to reduce what is called as a live range of the variable. We are going to study about that, but it essentially means that from the definition to the use, the variable is live. Right? In this case, we will say that the register is live. The term is typically used for variables, not for registers, but for our exposition purpose, we will say that the register is live. So this live range of register we would like to reduce as much as possible. And as soon as I reduce it, then the liveness of that particular register or the use of that register is going to be reduced accordingly. And if it gets minimized across different registers, I am likely to get fewer registers for the same code, right? Keeping in the semantics intact. So whatever we gave as the argument with respect to reducing the live range, that is not perfect in the sense that it makes sense in practice and it also works in practice. But you will be able to construct an example where you try to reduce the live range and something else happens, and the register pressure, as it is called, or the number of registers that get used, that might increase. So you might have to try a large number of such combinations to come up with the optimal answer. Sarthak has a question. Will this not reduce efficiency if we swap 3 and 4 as we have read after write hazard? Okay, good. That's a very good point. Is it possible that it might lead to hazard in the pipeline stage? So let's see. So we have this R2 equal to C, and that R0 is essentially getting read from in 4 and getting written to in R0. So that will happen in the so we have fetched the instruction, we have pushed that particular value inside the register in the scratchpad, and then in the write back stage we are going to use R0 for the next instruction. So I think it will not create a problem because it will be next cycle. By then R0 has already been used. So I don't think the hazard will happen. However, even if the hazard is likely to happen, it can be taken care of by moving R0's value to a scratchpad register or scratchpad area and then freeing up R0 in that particular site. So hazard is at 2 to 3 and 3 to 5 in the second code. 2 to 3. You mean 2 to 4 this way. So R1 is being written to and R1 is being read from. Yes, the write back happens of the instruction number 2, that is R1 equal to B, and that can conflict with the instruction decode of or even instruction execute of the instruction number 4. Yeah, there can be a conflict. That is true. That is a possibility. And then you are saying 3 and 5 where there is R0 which is getting used. That is possible. That is possible. But we can still take care of that by moving the register to the scratch pad and making sure that the register gets freed by the time the instruction fetch happens or instruction decode happens for the next instruction. If we keep dependent instruction at least 4 instructions apart, then it would be better for the pipeline. We don't need it to be, yeah, 4 is okay. I think we just require 3. So instruction fetch is alright. Instruction decode will probably require accessing that instruction. Even there you are not really going to make use of the register. It's actually only in the execute stage, the third stage of the pipeline, where you will actually use the register, because the register is on chip. You don't need to worry about that. And then that can be affecting the write back of the next stage of the next of the previous instruction, that can overlap with that. So in this case particularly, since we are dealing with registers, 2 cycles apart is what we require. But yeah, in general, if you have these 4 cycles apart, then you are not going to face any trouble. That is correct. In this case, yeah, in general, there will be a hazard. The what you call as, I forget the name of that hazard. It's something related to resources or something. Yeah, so that hazard is likely to happen, and that's a good point. I didn't think about this. This is more to explain the live range of variables, but yeah, you are right that the hazard might happen. But I hope you get the point that in general, by reordering the instructions, you'll be able to get different efficiencies. Good. So this was data hazards, an actual concern in practice. So the question here is the data hazard an actual concern in practice? Typically in the current architectures, this is not, it can occur, but typically what happens is that you have all these variables, you are not really accessing the, when you say that a particular variable is getting, you are not really accessing the memory location of that variable when you are dealing with the instructions, because you are dealing with that instruction, there are large number of stages between the CPU and the memory, and therefore there is a good chance that you are likely to be writing to the memory location only, let's say 5% of the times, because you will almost always, or maybe 2% of the times, almost always you are going to write to some either register or a cache, let's say L1, L2 or 3, and only if that misses, then you are going to, or only if the cache is let's say write through, then you are going to write into the main memory. So therefore, when you are writing to a variable and reading from the same variable, it's likely that you are referring to not the memory as such, but you are probably referring to some cached value and so on. And therefore, only a very few percentage of times you will get into this data hazard kind of scenario. But otherwise, you are going to just use it from different locations. You guys are not studying this semester, right? You must have done it in the last semester. 2600, I suppose. Okay. Any other concerns here? All right. So we'll move ahead. Yeah, so we looked at these three aspects: instruction selection, register allocation, and instruction ordering. These three are the main focus of a code generator, and it needs to worry about these primarily. When you are trying to generate code for a particular machine, you need to know that machine model, in the sense that you need to know the ISA, you need to know the semantics of those instructions and so on. For our discussion, we are going to assume some basic architecture, right? So, and this is a very typical architecture. So we are going to just assume that. So for example, there are going to be load store instructions for accessing memory, right? Then for computation, there might be some instructions like add, sub, mul, etc. And then there are jumps possible, which are going to be unconditional or conditional jumps. For example, branch, which is jump to a particular label, or branch if less than 0. That could be another instruction. If the value in R1 is less than 0, then jump to label main, right? So that is what it says. So this is the kind of typical machine model which suffices for most of the other instructions. For example, if you want to let's say have function calls, right? So well, there is something more that will be required, but you can say that the load and store you can do onto the stack pointer, right? So this could be a stack register, and you are pushing an address into the stack register, so that becomes pushing the return address before making a call, and after that there is branch to that particular label corresponding to that function, so that resembles a call instruction. Yeah, so branch if equal to, that is something which is currently not there, but then you can simulate it still by having multiple such conditional jumps. For example, branch if less than 0, then you negate the values inside R1, right? I mean, flip the and make it a negative number. Then branch if less than 0 of that to something else, and then the if still there is a fall through, then that means it is neither less than nor greater than 0, and therefore it is equal to 0. Like that we might be able to do. So that will also allow us to simulate other instructions using these basic machine model. When we are dealing with these different kinds of instructions, by the way, what is the, you guys said that you did RISC instruction set in CS2600 or which one? Okay. And that means that you are not too much aware of x86 architecture. Is that the correct assumption? Okay. So our A3, I don't know if some of you have seen it. So A3 is already up and on Moodle, and you are expected to generate assembly code for x86 architecture. So some of your learning for RISC-V is going to be useful, but it will also require a little more work on your side to understand more about the x86 architecture. Thankfully, you don't have to generate code for arbitrary instructions. So we have reduced it considerably such that essentially you need to worry about a few expressions which are going to have this add and sub instructions, and then printf. So that is just going to be call to printf. But you also need to push, for example, operands to the stack and so on. But the printf is also restricted. So we are going to discuss that a little more later, but I would suggest that you should spend some time learning about the x86 architecture. The concepts are going to be similar, just the instructions are going to differ. There will be some small quirks which might come because of the CISC nature, but I suppose you'll be able to kind of brush it up. If you feel, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask either directly to me or on Moodle. and I will try to answer those, or TAs will try to answer. Is there any chance of allowing risk V for A3? No. We'll go ahead with x86. I think the work has already been done towards that. Even the evaluation script is done. But I think more importantly than that is that I think it's okay. You should definitely know a little bit about x86 architecture considering its widespread use. So I think it's no harm at the end of your BTech or dual degree. If you know a little more about x86 architecture, I think it's good. There's also something which, okay, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so let's move ahead. There is something else that we require here when we are dealing with the machine model. What is that? So I talked about the instructions, but there is something more that is required. What else you need to know? Is there any possibility of an extension? Okay, you have already started asking for it, but it's good. I think this is the right time to ask about the extension. If we give the extension, will you still complete A4 on time, or you will ask for an extension for that also? It will depend upon that. Okay, we'll discuss about it, Nishit. We'll discuss about it later. Let me finish this part. Okay, so the other thing that we need to worry about is addressing modes, right? And so within instructions, how you are referring to the operands, that is going to decide how the addressing mode is going to be. So for example, I can have a direct addressing mode where I can say that whatever is the value stored inside this fixed constant location, load that value into a register. Or I can have a mnemonic associated with that address. Or I can have a variable indexed where there is variable A and then there is index. This is very useful for variable indexed is the addressing mode which is useful for jumps. Why do you say that? I didn't understand. Yeah, so many of you have written arrays, but Anishwar, why did you say jumps? I didn't understand. You must store the target. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. So you are probably thinking about the switch case statement where you have these different jumps. Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. It can be useful there also. So, for example, switch case statements, or if you have the function pointers for, let's say, typical example that is given is the, let's say, you are developing some sort of a GUI, right? Some menu. And then depending upon the menu, you need to invoke a certain functionality. So you have this function pointer. So these function pointers are stored consecutively. Depending upon the index of the menu, submenu that you choose, the appropriate index function pointer is going to invoke a particular function. So in such cases, essentially it's an array of function pointers. So in that case, it is going to be helpful. Yeah, but essentially it is going to be helpful for the array indexing. Then immediate index is also useful, where instead of a variable base address, you are going to have the address might be inside R2, right? And then 100 of that will take you to a particular address starting from that. Then indirect addressing mode, which can be used for pointers. Again, this particular syntax is arbitrary. I mean, this is not really x86 syntax. This is just an arbitrary syntax which I am using, and another is immediate. So it so happens that the syntax that we use is decided by the assembler which is used for that particular machine. But it turns out that for the same machine there could be multiple assemblers. Has anybody seen that? Can somebody give me an example of multiple assemblers for the same machine? VM. No, I think VM is a little different. So at the lowest end, when you are dealing with a VM running on a particular machine, on a host machine, it still has the same set of target machine instructions. As far as VM is running with that hypervisor, the hypervisor understands some codes, and those codes are going to be similar. I mean, whether you are having Windows or Linux machine, or I mean, as a virtual box, and those are kind of getting, those instructions are getting hooked using the hypervisor. That is also going to be uniform across these. So I don't see, although that is going to be different from the target machine, of course. But yeah, so that will not be this example. But that was a good thought. In fact, the answer is quite similar to this. I'll wait for a few more seconds. Okay, so it turns out that, I mean, many of you have this dual boot on your laptops, right? Windows and Linux. They both use different assemblers, but they all are running onto the same machine. Right? So what does that mean? That your instructions are going to be different that are executed by the hardware? No. Your hardware understands exactly the same machine code. But the higher level language, I mean, in this case, higher level meaning assembly language. The higher level language from where you are generating the code, this assembly instructions could be different, and therefore the assemblers, I mean, the assemblers are essentially different. So there are, in fact, in Linux itself, there are sometimes multiple assemblers. For example, there is a something called as gas. Right? What is that in the context of assembling? So there could be an Intel assembler, there could be gas, there could be MASM, NASM, right? So all of these different kinds of assemblers might exist. For example, on Windows DOS-based systems, you might have MASM. What is gas in this context? Okay. Gas is GNU assembler, right, which essentially gets used for this. So if you recall, not recall, but in some texts, if you see the assembly instructions of x86, let's say move instruction, the syntax is something like this: move destination comma source, right? Whereas if you look at the assembly code that gets generated by your GCC-S, you will see that the syntax is the opposite: move src comma dst. Right? That is happening because of the differences in the assembler. So that move dst comma src is likely to be from the MASM, from the DOS or Windows side, whereas move src comma dst is because of the gas syntax. So these are essentially different compilers. Assembler is also a compiler, right? It's probably going to be an easier compiler. You don't have to worry about arbitrary constructs and so on. Every line is going to give you one instruction at a time, almost. So there is a good mapping between the assembly that you have and the target code that you generate. Typically there is one-to-one mapping. There might be very few cases where assembly language might have something more than the target instructions. But because of that, you might have good similarity across different assembler syntax. Nishchit says, does CPU and GPU also use different assemblers? Okay, I think that is too advanced a question. But yes, CPU and GPU, they have different assemblers. In fact, the GPU is a different processor altogether, right? And therefore it has a different. So, for example, there might be an NVIDIA compiler which internally has a different assembler which generates code for the GPU, and many times, I mean, the architecture of the GPU is very different, so you definitely need a different assembler. But many times you also need a different compiler because the higher level syntax is also different. The CPU definitely is very different. That too, if you are talking in the context of parallel CPU, that is multi-core CPU processing, further there are complications. Although there will be a good stack which is related to the GCC that people use or LLVM which people use on the CPU. But yeah, there will be different assemblers used for CPU and GPU. In fact, the number of processors that you use, you are going to require those many assemblers. For example, there might be an FPGA associated with your machine or an ASIC associated with your machine, a GPU, even different kinds of GPU. You might have an AMD GPU, you might have an NVIDIA GPU. Or if you are talking about a phone, there might be, for example, there might be using Samsung, there might be a particular GPU inside your Android phone. There might be a TPU onto your server, right? So Google's TPU. So all of these are going to use different assemblers. There has been, since you mentioned this, there has been a lot of effort in making this standardized. So that gives rise to something called as OpenCL, Open Computing Language, using which you will be able to generate code for arbitrary devices. Right? So you just write code once, and that is going to generate code. You will be able to generate code using a particular compiler for CPU, for FPGA, for NVIDIA GPU, for AMD GPU, and so on. So that effort is also there. So in case somebody has interest, you can look it up. OpenCL. No, not OpenGL. It's OpenCL. OpenGL is only for the graphics part. OpenCL is for the computing part also, in general computing. Right? OpenGL is primarily for graphics. Any other questions, concerns? All right. So these were some of the addressing nodes that we should be using, and we should be aware of when we are generating target code for this. Right. So let's quickly look at the example code. So let's say that I have this instruction x equal to y minus z, which I lower into an IR using temporaries T1, T2. Right, and then from there I might be able to generate a target code which is using R1 and R2. So note how that T1 and T2 nicely got changed into R1 and R2, keeping most of it the same. Right, the rest of the instruction, there is a nice similarity between the IR and the target code. This shows that the IR is actually very low level, and it resembles the target code quite well. It need not always be in this form though. There are optimizations that you can do on this. For example, if y is already loaded into some register, then I can reuse that register. Right? Alternatively, if x is not getting used later, then I don't need to store it inside x. Right? And if I don't need to store it inside x, then I don't need this particular R1 either, and therefore I can remove this particular instruction as well. Right? So these are the optimizations which the machine dependent optimizations which one can use depending upon this. So here also in some form the use and the definition, that is the write and the read of different variables, gets used. So that dependence graph, also called as diffuse chain, that gets used to identify opportunities for optimization. So one important point here is that the optimization and code generation are often run together, and these are often run multiple times. So what that means is that of course you need to generate code only once, but once you have generated the code, that code might not be the best way to generate the code for. So once you have optimized it, then you might find that, oh, I might be able to now combine these instructions into a different instruction, right? And therefore you might be able to generate more efficient code. As you generate more efficient code, using, because we said that I might be able to do register allocation separately, I might be able to do instruction selection separately, as well as I might be able to reorder instructions. So all of these are going to be part of the code generation. Once I have optimized code, I might have more opportunities to do register allocation or instruction selection or instruction reordering. And that requires me to change the code. If I change the code, I might have further opportunities for optimization. And therefore, these need to be run little bit together, similar to the Lexiac cycle that we were discussing. Similarly, it might be the case that code generation triggers more optimization, and optimization might trigger more optimized code generator. I mean, more efficient ways of generating code. So this can happen together. In fact, it does happen together a few times. Yeah, so you should try a few exercises from chapter number 8, and we'll worry about the control flow graph maybe in the next class. Any quick questions? All right, so we'll stop here. I'll think about the assignment.